England, 1847. The grey skies of London loomed over Berkeley Square as Lady Annabel Lancaster sat motionless at her dressing table, watching her lady's maid arrange the delicate orange blossoms in her hair. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and resigned, her blue eyes rimmed with the faint traces of tears she had shed in private. "You look beautiful, my lady," whispered Eleanor, her maid since childhood, carefully adjusting the veil. Annabel merely nodded, unable to find her voice. At 18 years old, this was to be her wedding day, though not one of her choosing. The formal announcement had appeared in the papers just 6 weeks prior. Lady Annabel Lancaster, daughter of the Earl of Westmoreland, to wed His Grace, Andrew Bedford, the Duke of Hertwick. Her father had fallen deeply into debt, and the only salvation for the Lancaster name lay in an advantageous marriage. The Duke of Hertwick was wealthy beyond measure, with estates across 3 counties and investments in shipping companies that reached as far as India. His title was ancient, his bloodline impeccable, and his reputation formidable. "Your father requests your presence downstairs, my lady," announced the butler from the doorway. With a deep breath, Annabel rose, her cream silk gown rustling softly. She had pleaded with her father for weeks, begging him to reconsider, but the Earl had been unmoved. "This is not a matter of choice, Annabel," he had told her firmly. "It is your duty to your family. The Duke will provide for you handsomely, and you will want for nothing." Except love, she had thought bitterly. Downstairs, her father waited in the entrance hall, his expression a mixture of relief and determination. "You look every inch a duchess," he said approvingly. "Remember your upbringing today. Show the Duke and his family that the Lancasters are worthy of this alliance." "Yes, father," she replied mechanically, as the footman opened the door to the waiting carriage. St. George's Church in Hanover Square was filled with the cream of London society, all eager to witness the union of 2 distinguished families. Annabel walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her gaze fixed straight ahead, where her future husband awaited. Andrew Bedford, the Duke of Hertwick, stood tall and imposing before the altar. At 30 years of age, he was a striking figure, with dark hair and piercing grey eyes that betrayed no emotion as his bride approached. His strong jawline was set rigidly, his posture perfect, the embodiment of aristocratic control. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient vows and solemn promises. When the Duke slipped the gold band onto her finger, Annabel noticed his hands were steady, betraying no hesitation or sentiment. His "I will" was spoken clearly and without inflection, as though he were merely concluding a business transaction, which, in essence, he was. The wedding breakfast at Lancaster House was a lavish affair, though the bride barely touched her food. She observed her new husband from across the table as he conversed politely with her relatives. Not once did he seek her gaze or attempt to engage her in conversation. As evening fell, Annabel found herself being escorted to a magnificent carriage bearing the Bedford coat of arms. Her trunks had already been sent ahead to Hertwick House, the Duke's London residence. Her mother embraced her briefly, whispering, "Be obedient, my dear. In time, you may find contentment." The carriage ride to Hertwick House was conducted in silence. Seated opposite his new bride, the Duke appeared absorbed in his own thoughts, occasionally glancing out the window at the passing streets of Mayfair. "Your chambers have been prepared according to your mother's instructions," he finally said, as the carriage passed through the imposing gates of Hertwick House. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Fairchild, will attend to your needs." "Thank you, Your Grace," Annabel replied softly. The Duke's mouth tightened slightly. "Andrew will suffice in private. We are married now, after all." Hertwick House was magnificent, with marble floors, gilded ceilings, and priceless artwork adorning every wall. Yet as Annabel was led through the grand entrance hall and up the sweeping staircase, she felt more like a prisoner than a bride. Mrs. Fairchild, a stern-faced woman of indeterminate age, showed her to a suite of rooms decorated in pale blue silk. "His Grace occupies the chambers at the opposite end of this corridor," the housekeeper explained. "He rises early and often breakfasts alone in his study. The household runs on a strict schedule, which you will come to learn." Left alone, Annabel sat at the edge of her new bed, finally allowing herself to weep quietly. This was to be her life now, married to a stranger who had looked at her with less interest than he might show a newly acquired horse. Later that evening, there was a knock at her door. Eleanor helped her change into a nightgown of fine lawn, trimmed with Brussels lace, part of her trousseau. The Duke entered without ceremony, dressed in a dark robe. His expression was inscrutable as he approached the bed. "I trust your chambers are satisfactory," he said, his voice formal. "Yes, thank you," she replied, unable to meet his gaze. What followed was a brief, detached consummation of their marriage, performed as dutifully as the signing of their marriage certificate. The Duke was not cruel, but neither was he tender. When it was over, he rose immediately and donned his robe. "I shall bid you good night," he said, pausing at the door. "I must leave for my estate in Derbyshire tomorrow. Business matters require my attention." "How long will you be gone?" Annabel ventured to ask. "A fortnight, perhaps longer." He hesitated, then added, "This marriage means nothing beyond what it must. You will have your title, your allowance, and your freedom within reason. I expect discretion and proper behavior befitting your station. Beyond that, we need not inconvenience each other unduly." With those cold words he departed, leaving Annabel alone to contemplate the empty years that stretched before her. The weeks that followed were a lesson in loneliness. True to his word, the Duke departed early the next morning without bidding her farewell. Annabel was left to navigate her new position under the watchful eye of Mrs. Fairchild, who seemed determined to find fault with everything she did. "His Grace prefers the household accounts to be reviewed on Tuesdays, not Mondays," the housekeeper would say, or "The Duke does not approve of fresh flowers in the library. They aggravate his sensitivity to pollen." Gradually, Annabel began to form a picture of her absent husband through these small details. A man of rigid habits and exacting standards, who preferred order above all else. On the rare occasions when she ventured into society, accompanied by her lady's companion, Mrs. Hathaway, Annabel found herself the object of curious stares and whispered speculation. The new Duchess of Hartwick, wedded and abandoned within a day, it was too delicious a piece of gossip for the tongue to resist. "My dear," Lady Pembroke remarked during an afternoon call, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "how brave you are to face society alone. The Duke is fortunate to have such an understanding wife." Annabel forced a smile. "My husband's business interests are extensive, Lady Pembroke. I can hardly expect him to neglect them merely to escort me to tea parties." In truth, each day without word from the Duke was a fresh humiliation. She wrote to him once, a carefully composed letter inquiring after his health and informing him of her activities in London. No reply came. The Duke's fortnight in Derbyshire stretched to 3 weeks, then a month. When he finally returned to Hartwick House, it was late at night and Annabel was already abed. She awoke to the sound of her door opening and in the dim light of a single candle saw her husband enter her chamber. "Forgive the intrusion," he said formally. "I have only just returned from Derbyshire." "I trust your business was successful, Your Grace," she replied, sitting up and drawing the covers around her. "Adequately so." He remained standing at the foot of her bed, as though uncertain of his welcome. "I received your letter." "You did not reply," she observed, unable to keep a hint of reproach from her voice. "I am not in the habit of correspondence," he said stiffly. "I find it difficult to express myself in writing." There was an awkward silence before he spoke again. "I shall leave for my club now and return in the morning. I merely wish to inform you of my arrival." "At this hour?" Annabel asked, surprised. "Surely even your club will be closed." "I have arranged accommodations there," he explained. "I did not wish to disturb your rest further." "You would not be disturbing me if you remained here," she said quietly. "This is your home, after all." Andrew hesitated, something flickering in his eyes that Annabel couldn't quite identify. "Perhaps it would be best if I did stay," he conceded. "I have business matters to attend to early tomorrow." He departed then, presumably for his own chambers, leaving Annabel to wonder at the strange formality between them. They were husband and wife, yet they lived as polite strangers under the same roof. The pattern continued in the days that followed. The Duke would breakfast early, alone in his study, spend the day attending to business in the city, and return late in the evening, often after Annabel had retired. On the rare occasions when they dined together, conversation was stilted, limited to the most innocuous of topics: the weather, a new exhibition at the Royal Academy, news of distant relatives. Once a week, usually on Tuesdays, he would come to her chamber. These visits were always the same, brief, formal, devoid of true intimacy. Afterward, He would thank her politely, as though she had done him some small service, and return to his own rooms. "This marriage means nothing," he had said on their wedding night. With each passing day, Annabel was forced to accept the truth of those words. Theirs was a union in name only, a business arrangement disguised as matrimony. Yet sometimes, when she thought herself unobserved, she would catch the Duke watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity, perhaps, or puzzlement, as though she were a riddle he couldn't solve. One evening, nearly 2 months after their wedding, Annabel was sitting in the drawing room reading a novel when the Duke entered unexpectedly. "Forgive me," he said, turning to leave. "I did not know you were here." "Please, don't go on my account," she replied, setting aside her book. "This is your house, after all." He hesitated, then crossed to the sideboard and poured himself a glass of brandy. "What are you reading?" he asked, seemingly at a loss for anything else to say. "Jane Eyre," she answered. "It was published earlier this year. Have you read it?" "I have little time for novels," he replied, but there was no condescension in his tone. "Is it to your liking?" "Very much so. The heroine is most compelling, strong-willed and independent despite her circumstances. Qualities you admire, I take it." There was genuine curiosity in his voice. "Yes," she admitted, "though I fear I possess neither her strength nor her courage." Andrew studied her over the rim of his glass. "You underestimate yourself, I think. It requires considerable fortitude to leave one's family and marry a stranger, as you have done." "I had little choice in the matter," she reminded him, a trace of bitterness creeping into her voice. "Nor did I," he said quietly. "But we must make the best of our situation, must we not?" Before she could respond, he drained his glass and set it down. "I have letters to write. Good evening, Annabel." As he left the room, Annabel realized it was the first time he had called her by her given name since their wedding night. The following week, a large parcel arrived from Hatchard's, the bookshop on Piccadilly. Inside, Annabel found a complete set of the Brontë sisters' works, including Jane Eyre. There was no note, but she knew who had sent them. That evening, when the Duke came to her chamber, there was a subtle difference in his manner, a hesitancy, almost a gentleness, that had not been there before. "Thank you for the books," Annabel said softly as he prepared to leave. He paused, his back to her. "I thought you might enjoy them. It was most thoughtful of you." He turned then, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his expression. "I have not been considerate of your happiness, I fear. This cannot be the life you envisioned for yourself." "Nor you," she replied. "I understand that this marriage was not of your choosing either." Andrew's mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "My choices have rarely been my own. As the heir to a dukedom, my path was set from birth." "A gilded cage is still a cage," Annabel observed. His eyes met hers, and for a moment there was a flash of genuine connection between them. "Precisely so," he agreed. "Good night, Annabel." "Good night, Andrew," she replied, using his given name for the first time. As she lay awake long after he had gone, Annabel pondered the enigma that was her husband. Perhaps there was more to the Duke of Hartwick than the cold, distant man she had married. Perhaps beneath his rigid exterior there beat a heart capable of understanding, if not love. It was a slender hope, but in her lonely existence it was enough to sustain her through the empty days that stretched ahead. 3 months into her marriage, Annabel had grown accustomed to solitude. The Duke was frequently absent, attending to his numerous business interests or visiting his country estates. When he was in residence at Hartwick House, he spent most of his time in his study or at his club, returning late in the evening. He visited her bedchamber infrequently, once or twice a month at most, and always with the same detached formality. Their encounters were brief, and he never stayed until morning. Annabel had learned to expect nothing more from these visits than what they were, the Duke fulfilling what he saw as a marital obligation. One crisp autumn morning, Annabel sat in the morning room, reviewing the household accounts with Mrs. Fairchild. She had determined early in her marriage that if she could not have love, she would at least have purpose. The running of Hartwick House had gradually been surrendered to her capable hands, much to the housekeeper's initial reluctance. "The Duke's correspondence, Your Grace," announced Simmons, the butler, presenting a silver tray with several letters. Among them was an invitation to Lady Harrington's annual autumn ball, one of the most coveted social events of the season. Annabel set it aside to discuss with her husband, should he return home that evening. To her surprise, the Duke did appear for dinner, impeccably dressed as always, his manner polite but distant. "I received an invitation to Lady Harrington's ball," Annabel mentioned as the footman served the second course. "I thought perhaps we might attend together." Andrew looked up from his plate, a flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossing his features. "I had not planned to attend." "Oh." Annabel lowered her gaze to her barely touched food. "I understand." A moment of silence passed before the Duke sighed, almost imperceptibly. "However, as the season is beginning in earnest, I suppose it would be expected for us to make an appearance together." "Only if it would not inconvenience you," she replied, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. The Duke regarded her thoughtfully. "You are the Duchess of Hartwick now. Society will expect to see you take your place. It would be remiss of me to deny you that opportunity." The night of the ball arrived, and Annabel dressed with particular care. Her gown of deep emerald silk complemented her fair complexion and auburn hair, which was arranged in an elegant style adorned with diamond pins, a wedding gift from her husband that had arrived with a formal note rather than in person. When she descended the staircase, she found Andrew waiting in the entrance hall. For a brief moment, as he looked up at her, she thought she detected a flash of admiration in his eyes. "You look very well," he said, offering his arm. "That colour suits you." "Thank you," she replied, surprised by the rare compliment. Lady Harrington's ballroom was ablaze with candlelight, the air filled with music and conversation. As the Duke and Duchess of Hartwick were announced, a momentary hush fell over the gathering, followed by a flurry of whispers. Annabel held her head high, conscious of the scrutiny they faced as a newly married couple who had rarely been seen together in public. "Courage," Andrew murmured, surprising her again as he guided her into the room. "Half of them are merely curious, the other half envious." "What have they to envy?" she asked softly. "Your youth, your beauty, your title," he replied matter-of-factly. "Never underestimate the power of appearances, Annabel." It was the first time he had used her given name in public. The Duke performed his social duties with practiced ease, introducing Annabel to various members of society. Among them was Lady Victoria Blackwood, the Countess of Crenshaw, a striking widow in her early 30s whose smile did not reach her eyes as she greeted Annabel. "My dear Duke," Lady Blackwood said, placing her gloved hand familiarly on Andrew's arm. "How delightful to see you at last. You've been quite the recluse since your marriage." "Business matters, Victoria," he replied. "You know how it is." "Indeed." Her gaze shifted to Annabel. "And this is your bride? How charming. So young, so fresh from the schoolroom." "I assure you I completed my education some time ago," Annabel replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. Lady Blackwood's smile tightened. "Of course you did, my dear. Andrew, you must promise me a dance later, for old times' sake." As the evening progressed, Annabel found herself increasingly aware of Lady Blackwood's presence. The woman seemed to hover at the edges of her vision, watching her with an unsettling intensity. When the Duke claimed his obligatory dance with his wife, Annabel could feel the Countess's eyes following their every move. "You are acquainted with Lady Blackwood?" Annabel asked as they moved through the steps of the quadrille. "Her late husband was a friend of my father's," Andrew replied. "The Blackwoods and the Bedfords have been connected for generations." "She seems quite familiar with you." Andrew's expression hardened slightly. "Victoria has been a family friend for many years." Nothing more. But later, when Annabel observed the Duke dancing with Lady Blackwood, she could not help but notice the animation in his face, so different from his usual reserve. They appeared to converse easily, with a familiarity born of long acquaintance. As the dance ended, Annabel found herself approached by a group of young ladies she had known before her marriage. "Dear Annabel," said Miss Catherine Pembroke, a girl she had once considered a friend, "we've hardly seen you since your wedding. Is married life everything you hoped?" The question was innocent enough, but Annabel detected an undercurrent of curiosity, perhaps even malice beneath it. "It is different from what I expected," she replied carefully. "I imagine it must be," said another girl, Miss Elizabeth Thornton. "The Duke has quite the reputation after all." "Reputation?" Annabel echoed, her heart quickening. Catherine leaned closer. "They say he was quite devoted to Lady Blackwood before her husband's death. There were rumours, unfounded, I'm sure, Annabel interrupted, though a cold knot had formed in her stomach. Of course, Elizabeth agreed too quickly. Though it is curious how often the Duke is seen at Lady Blackwood's residence even now. My brother mentioned seeing his carriage there just last week. Annabel maintained her composure, but inside, pieces were falling into place. The Duke's frequent absences, his emotional distance, his ease with Victoria Blackwood. Could it be that her marriage was even more of a sham than she had believed? The ride home from the ball was conducted in silence, but this time the quiet between them felt charged with unspoken questions. As they reached Hartwick House, Annabel finally gathered her courage. "Do you call on Lady Blackwood often?" she asked as the carriage came to a stop. Andrew turned to her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Why do you ask?" "Mere curiosity. She seems to know you well." "As I said, she is a family friend." His tone made it clear the subject was closed. In the weeks that followed, whispers seemed to follow Annabel wherever she went. At afternoon teas in the park, even at church, she became aware of sidelong glances and conversations that ceased abruptly upon her approach. The Duchess of Hartwick, it seemed, was an object of pity. One afternoon, as Annabel returned from a visit to her mother, she was surprised to find Lady Blackwood's carriage outside Hartwick House. Unable to face the woman, she instructed her driver to continue around the block, returning an hour later to find the carriage gone. That evening, the Duke announced another departure. "I must travel to Yorkshire to inspect the mines there," he stated over dinner. "I shall be gone for at least 3 weeks. "I see," Annabel replied, setting down her fork. "Will you be travelling alone?" Andrew's eyes narrowed slightly. "My steward accompanies me as always." "Why do you ask?" "No reason," she said, forcing a smile. "I merely thought I might accompany you, as I have never seen the northern counties." "The journey would be too arduous for you," he replied dismissively, "and the accommodations are not suitable for a duchess." The following day, after Andrew's departure, Annabel received a note from her cousin, Lady Sophia Caldwell, inviting her to tea. Grateful for the distraction, she accepted immediately. Sophia's townhouse was a warm, welcoming place, so different from the formal grandeur of Hartwick House. As they sat in her cosy drawing room, Sophia regarded Annabel with concern. "You look pale, my dear," she observed. "Is married life not agreeing with you?" Annabel hesitated, then found herself confiding in her cousin. "My marriage is not what I had hoped, Sophia. The Duke and we live separate lives." "Many aristocratic marriages are so," Sophia replied gently. "Yes, but there is more." Annabel lowered her voice. "There are rumours about the Duke and Lady Blackwood. I fear I am merely a convenient facade behind which he continues his true attachment." Sophia frowned. "Victoria Blackwood is a dangerous woman, Annabel. She has always coveted the Bedford fortune, even during her marriage to Lord Blackwood. When her husband died, many expected the Duke to offer for her, but instead, he chose you." "Not by choice," Annabel corrected bitterly. "Our marriage was arranged by our families." "Perhaps," Sophia conceded, "but I have known Andrew Bedford since we were children. He is a proud man, but not a dishonourable one. Do not be too quick to believe the worst of him." As Annabel left her cousin's house, she felt more confused than ever. Who was the real Andrew Bedford, the cold, distant husband who had told her their marriage meant nothing, or the honourable man Sophia believed him to be? The answer, she feared, might break her heart either way. The Duke's absence stretched beyond the promised 3 weeks. As the 4th week began with no word from Yorkshire, Annabel found herself growing increasingly anxious. Had he extended his stay deliberately to avoid returning to her? Or worse, was he not in Yorkshire at all, but somewhere with Lady Blackwood, as the rumours suggested? She chided herself for such thoughts. Whatever his faults, Andrew had never lied to her outright. If he said he was inspecting the mines, then surely that was where he was. On the 26th day of his absence, Annabel was startled by a commotion in the entrance hall. Setting aside her embroidery, she hurried from the drawing room to find several footmen carrying in a trunk, followed by the Duke's valet, looking harried. "What is happening?" she asked the nearest servant. "His Grace has returned, Your Grace," the footman replied. "But there has been an accident." Alarm shot through her. "An accident? Where is the Duke?" "In the carriage, ma'am." "Dr. Fenton has been summoned." Annabel rushed outside to find Andrew being helped from the carriage by his coachman and steward. His face was pale beneath a layer of grime, and he winced visibly as he put weight on his right leg. "Andrew!" she exclaimed, hurrying to his side. "What happened?" He looked up, surprise registering in his eyes at the genuine concern in her voice. "A minor incident at the mine," he said, his voice strained. "Nothing to concern yourself with." "You are injured," she protested, taking in the makeshift bandage visible beneath his torn trouser leg. "A cut, nothing more, though I fear I may have twisted my ankle as well." With the help of the servants, Andrew was escorted to his chamber, where Dr. Fenton soon arrived to examine him. Annabel waited anxiously in the corridor, pacing back and forth until the doctor emerged. "How is he?" she asked immediately. "The wound on his leg required several stitches, and his ankle is badly sprained, but there is no permanent damage," the doctor reassured her. "He will need to rest the leg for at least a fortnight, however. No riding or unnecessary movement." Annabel nodded. "I shall see to it personally." The doctor regarded her with surprise, then approval. "Very good, Your Grace. I have left instructions with his valet regarding the changing of bandages and a tonic for pain." When the doctor had gone, Annabel took a deep breath and knocked on her husband's door. Andrew's valet answered, looking somewhat relieved to see her. "His Grace is resting, Your Grace," he said, "but I believe he is still awake." "Thank you, Phillips. You may go. I shall sit with the Duke for a while." Andrew was propped up in his bed, his injured leg elevated on a pillow. He looked up in surprise as she entered. "Annabel," he said, his voice weary, "there is no need for you to attend me. Phillips is quite capable." "I am sure he is," she replied, taking a seat in the chair beside his bed, "but I am your wife. It is my duty to care for you in illness." A flicker of something, gratitude perhaps, crossed his face before his usual reserve reasserted itself. "As you wish, though I assure you I shall recover quickly." "What happened?" she asked, noting the lines of pain around his eyes despite his attempt to appear unaffected. Andrew sighed. "A section of scaffolding collapsed while I was inspecting a new tunnel. I was fortunate to escape with only minor injuries. 2 of the miners were not so lucky." "They were killed?" Annabel asked, horrified. "No, thank heavens, but both suffered broken limbs. I have arranged for their families to be compensated and for the best medical care available." This glimpse of compassion surprised her. It did not align with the cold, uncaring man she had believed her husband to be. "You might have been killed," she said softly, the realization sending an unexpected chill through her. Andrew's eyes met hers, and for a moment the barriers between them seemed to thin. "Would that have distressed you?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Of course it would," she replied without hesitation. "Whatever our circumstances, I would never wish you harm." He studied her face as if searching for something. "You are kind, Annabel. Kinder than I deserve, perhaps." Before she could respond to this unexpected admission, there was a knock at the door. Simmons entered, looking uncomfortable. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but Lady Blackwood has called. She insists on seeing the Duke immediately, having heard of his accident." Annabel stiffened while Andrew's expression darkened. "Inform Lady Blackwood that I am resting on doctor's orders and cannot receive visitors," he said firmly. "I did attempt to explain, Your Grace, but the lady is most insistent." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Then you may inform her with my compliments that if she wishes to speak with me, she may call at a more appropriate hour tomorrow." Simmons bowed and withdrew. Annabel rose, assuming that Andrew would prefer to be alone when dealing with matters concerning Lady Blackwood. "I should let you rest," she said, moving toward the door. "Wait." Andrew's voice stopped her. "I would prefer it if you stayed, Annabel. I find I'm not in the mood for solitude this evening." Surprised but pleased, she returned to her chair. "Then I shall stay as long as you wish." For the first time since their marriage, they spent an evening in genuine conversation. Andrew spoke of the mines in Yorkshire, of his concerns for the safety of the workers, and of his plans to implement new protective measures. Annabel, in turn, told him of her efforts with the household and her visits to the Bedford charitable institutions in his absence. As the evening wore on, Andrew's eyelids began to droop, the effects of the doctor's tonic taking hold. Annabel rose quietly, intending to slip away, but his voice, slurred with approaching sleep, reached her. "You are not what I expected, Annabel Bedford," he murmured. Not at all what I expected. Before she could ask what he meant, he had drifted into sleep. Gently, she adjusted his blankets and extinguished all but one candle before leaving the room. The following days established a new pattern in their relationship. Annabel visited Andrew's chambers regularly, reading to him from the newspapers or one of her novels, playing chess, at which she proved surprisingly adept, or simply sitting in companionable silence while she worked on her embroidery and he reviewed business correspondence. Lady Blackwood called again the next day, but Andrew refused to see her, sending word through Simmons that he was not receiving visitors. The Countess left a note which Andrew read and then immediately consigned to the fire, his expression grim. "Victoria can be persistent," he remarked when he saw Annabel watching him, "but she will soon tire of being rebuffed." "She seems very concerned for your welfare," Annabel observed carefully. Andrew's mouth twisted in a sardonic smile. "Victoria is concerned primarily for her own interests, which she believes are somehow tied to mine. It is a misapprehension I have attempted to correct on numerous occasions. Without success, it seems. Some people hear only what they wish to hear," he replied, and then, as if wishing to change the subject, "Would you read to me from that novel you mentioned yesterday? I find myself curious about this, Mr. Rochester." By the time Andrew was able to move about with the aid of a cane, a fortnight later, something fundamental had shifted between them. The formal politeness that had characterized their interactions had given way to a more genuine companionship. Andrew still maintained a certain reserve, but there were moments when Annabel caught glimpses of the man beneath the ducal facade, thoughtful, intelligent, and possessed of a dry wit she had never suspected. One evening, as they sat in the library after dinner, Andrew's first meal downstairs since his accident, he broached a subject that took her by surprise. "I believe we have been invited to the Pembrokes' dinner party next week," he said, examining the invitation that had arrived that morning. "If you wish to attend, I believe I shall be recovered enough to accompany you." Annabel looked up from her book. "You would not find it too taxing?" "No more than I find most social occasions," he replied with a wry smile. "But I am aware that you have had little opportunity for society since our marriage. It would be selfish of me to deprive you further." "I have not felt deprived," she said honestly, "but I would enjoy attending if you are certain you are well enough." Andrew nodded, then hesitated, as though weighing his next words carefully. "I have been thinking, Annabel, that perhaps we might reconsider certain aspects of our arrangement." "Our arrangement?" she echoed, uncertain of his meaning. "Our marriage," he clarified. I have not been a proper husband to you. My frequent absences, my neglect, they were unfair." Annabel felt her heart quicken. "What are you suggesting?" "That we might attempt a more conventional marriage," he said, his eyes meeting hers directly. "I cannot promise romance or grand passion, Annabel. Such things are not in my nature, but I can offer companionship, respect, and consideration for your happiness." It was more than she had ever expected from their union, yet somehow less than what she had begun, in the quiet corners of her heart, to hope for. "I would like that," she replied softly. "Very much." A fleeting smile crossed Andrew's face, transforming his features momentarily. "Good. That isn't good." As she prepared for bed that night, Annabel reflected on the strange turn her marriage had taken. The cold, distant duke who had told her their marriage meant nothing had been replaced by a man who, while still reserved, seemed genuinely interested in forging a real partnership. Yet the shadow of Victoria Blackwood still loomed over them, a reminder that there were aspects of her husband's life and heart that remained closed to her. Could she be content with the companionship he offered, knowing there might be parts of himself he would never share? The answer, she realized with a mixture of resignation and hope, was yes. For now, at least, it would be enough. The Duke's recovery continued steadily, and by the time of the Pembrokes' dinner party, he was able to walk with only the slightest hint of a limp. As promised, he escorted Annabel to the event, where their appearance together caused a fresh wave of speculation among the ton. "The Duke and Duchess of Hertwick," announced the Pembrokes' butler as they entered the drawing-room. "How delightful that you could join us," Lady Pembroke exclaimed, her eyes darting curiously between them. "We had heard of your accident, Your Grace. I trust you are fully recovered." "Nearly so, Lady Pembroke," Andrew replied with cool politeness. "My wife has been an exemplary nurse." The surprise that flickered across their hostess's face at this public acknowledgement of Annabel's care was unmistakable. Clearly the gossips had not yet caught wind of the shift in the Hartwicks' relationship. Throughout the evening, Annabel was aware of curious glances and whispered conversations. The Duke remained by her side more consistently than he ever had before, his hand occasionally coming to rest at the small of her back as they moved through the room, a gesture that felt oddly protective. "People are talking," she murmured as they took their places for dinner. "People always talk," he replied with a dismissive shrug. "Let them. We know the truth of our situation." The truth. What was the truth of their situation? Annabel wasn't entirely sure herself. They had progressed from cold formality to something resembling friendship, but there remained so much unspoken between them. Dinner proceeded pleasantly enough until Lady Pembroke, perhaps emboldened by several glasses of wine, broached a subject that caused the entire table to fall silent. "I understand Lady Blackwood has left London rather suddenly," she remarked, her gaze fixed pointedly on the Duke. "To Italy, I believe. Such a shame. She was always such a lively addition to any gathering." Andrew's expression betrayed nothing, but Annabel felt him tense beside her. "Indeed," he replied noncommittally, "though I believe the climate there will suit her admirably." "One wonders what prompted such a hasty departure," Lady Pembroke persisted. "There are rumours, of course." "There are always rumours, Lady Pembroke," Andrew said, his voice taking on an edge of steel. "Most of them utterly without foundation." The warning in his tone was unmistakable, and even Lady Pembroke had the good sense to retreat. "Of course, Your Grace, merely idle speculation, nothing more." The remainder of the evening passed without incident, but Annabel could sense her husband's discomfort. As they rode home in their carriage, she finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been tormenting her for weeks. "Did you send Lady Blackwood to Italy?" Andrew was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then, with a sigh, he said, "Yes." "May I ask why?" He turned to look at her, his expression grave in the dim light of the carriage lanterns. "Because she threatened to cause a scandal that would have touched not only me but you as well. I could not allow that." Annabel's heart sank. So there had been something between them after all. "I see." "No, I don't think you do," Andrew said quietly. "Victoria Blackwood is a desperate woman. When her husband died, he left her with substantial debts and few resources. She had convinced herself that I would offer for her, a delusion I never encouraged. When I married you instead, she became vindictive. The rumors about your visits to her home were grossly exaggerated," he finished. "I called on her twice at her request to discuss a small allowance I had arranged for her out of respect for her late husband's friendship with my father. She attempted to misrepresent the nature of those visits." Relief washed over Annabel, followed quickly by shame at how readily she had believed the worst of him. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have doubted you." Andrew's expression softened slightly. "You had little reason not to. I had given you no cause to trust me, Annabel." When they returned home, Andrew surprised her by escorting her to her chamber door, something he had never done before. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," he said formally. "I found the evening more tolerable than I expected." "As did I," she replied with a small smile. He hesitated, then added, "I leave for Derbyshire tomorrow. Thornhill Park requires my attention. I thought perhaps you might like to accompany me this time." Annabel's heart leaped at the invitation. "I would like that very much." The journey to Derbyshire took 2 days, with an overnight stay at a comfortable inn along the way. As they travelled further north, Annabel watched the landscape change from the gentle fields of the south to the more dramatic scenery of the Peak District. Andrew proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and relating snippets of local history. "There," he said late on the second day, indicating a distant hill crowned with ancient trees. "You can just see the chimneys of Thornhill Park." As they drew closer, Annabel caught her breath at the sight of a magnificent manor house built of golden stone, its mullioned windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. Set amidst formal gardens and surrounded by parkland, it was a vision from another age. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is home," Andrew replied simply, but she could hear the pride and affection in his voice. The household had been prepared for their arrival, with fires lit in the main rooms and a light meal ready to be served. Mrs. Wilson, the housekeeper, greeted them in the grand entrance hall, her initial reserve toward Annabel softening visibly when Andrew introduced her as my duchess who has honored me by accompanying me on this visit. After refreshing herself in the elegant suite of rooms prepared for her, Annabel joined Andrew for a tour of the house. Thornhill Park was older than Hartwick House, with a history that stretched back to Tudor times. Each room seemed to hold centuries of stories, from the great hall with its hammer-beam roof to the long gallery lined with portraits of Bedford ancestors. "And this," Andrew said, opening a door at the end of a corridor, "is my favorite room." It was a library, but unlike any Annabel had seen before. 2 stories high, with a gallery running around the upper level, it contained thousands of volumes shelved from floor to ceiling. Comfortable chairs were placed near the windows to catch the natural light, while a massive desk dominated one end of the room. "It's magnificent," Annabel breathed, turning slowly to take in the sight. "Do you know what's in all these books?" "Not all," Andrew admitted with a small smile. "My ancestors were avid collectors. I've been working my way through them since childhood, but I doubt I'll ever read them all." "What a wonderful problem to have," she replied, running her fingers along the spines of nearby volumes. For the first time since she had known him, Andrew laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed his usually stern features. "Only you would see it as a problem, Annabel. Most would see it as a treasure." "Oh, it is a treasure," she assured him, "but also a delightful challenge. Where does one begin with so many choices?" The week at Thornhill Park passed in a haze of pleasant discovery. Each day Andrew would attend to estate business in the morning, while Annabel explored the house and gardens. In the afternoons, he would often join her for a ride through the parkland or a visit to one of the tenant farms. To Annabel's surprise, the workers and tenants greeted their duke with evident respect and even affection, a far cry from the cold, distant man she had first married. Here, among people who had known him all his life, Andrew seemed more relaxed, more himself. "You are different here," she observed one evening, as they sat in the library after dinner, a chessboard between them. "Am I?" he asked, studying the pieces. "Yes. Less the Duke and more just Andrew." He looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps because Thornhill is where I was happiest as a child, before the weight of the dukedom fell on my shoulders, before my father's expectations became a yoke I could not escape." "Was he very stern, your father?" Andrew's mouth twisted in a bitter smile. Stern would be a kind description. He was relentless in his pursuit of perfection. "Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. Too bookish, too sensitive, too interested in the welfare of the tenants rather than the maximization of profit." "That sounds lonely," Annabel said softly. "It was," he admitted, surprising her with his candor. "Until I was sent to school, my only real companion was my mother. She was kind, gentle, everything my father was not." "You miss her," Annabel observed, not a question but a statement. "Every day," he replied, moving a chess piece. "She would have liked you, I think." The compliment warmed her more than she could express. "Tell me about her?" And so he did, the game forgotten as Andrew spoke of his mother with a tenderness Annabel had never heard in his voice before. Lady Anne Bedford had been a botanist of some renown, the creator of the famous rose gardens at Thornhill Park, and a champion of education for the tenant children. She established a school on the estate, Andrew explained. Insisted that every child, boy or girl, should learn to read and write. My father thought it a waste of resources, but she was adamant. "She sounds remarkable." She was. His eyes met hers across the chessboard. "You remind me of her sometimes. The same quiet determination, the same compassion for others." Annabel felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "I would have liked to know her." "So would I," he replied softly. "She died when I was 15, a fever that the doctors could not cure." "I'm sorry," she said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. To her surprise, he turned his palm upward, capturing her fingers in his. "Thank you, Annabel, for listening, for understanding." The moment stretched between them, filled with an intimacy that had nothing to do with physical proximity. For the first time, Annabel felt she was seeing the real Andrew Bedford, the man behind the ducal mask. "Check," she said finally, nodding toward the board with a small smile. Andrew looked down, his expression shifting to one of mock outrage. "While I was distracted by sentiment, most unsporting of you, Duchess." "All's fair in love and chess," she replied lightly, then blushed at her choice of words. But Andrew merely smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. "Indeed it is," he agreed, studying the board intently. "Indeed it is." Their last night at Thornhill Park, a storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the distant hills. Annabel stood at the window of her bedroom, watching the dramatic display, when a knock sounded at her door. It was Andrew, a candle in his hand, dressed in his robe. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. "I wanted to ensure you were not alarmed by the storm." "Not at all," she replied, pulling her own robe more securely around her. "I was just admiring nature's spectacle." He smiled slightly. "Still finding it exhilarating rather than terrifying?" "Absolutely." He hesitated, then said, "I used to watch storms from the North Tower. The view is quite spectacular, if you're interested." "Now? In our nightclothes?" "There's no one to see but the portraits, and they've witnessed far worse over the centuries," he assured her, with a hint of mischief that was entirely new. Intrigued by this playful side of her usually serious husband, Annabel nodded. "Lead on, Your Grace." The North Tower was accessed by a narrow stone staircase that wound upward in a tight spiral. At the top was a small circular room with windows on all sides, offering a panoramic view of the estate and the storm that raged around it. "Oh," Annabel breathed as lightning illuminated the dramatic landscape. "It's magnificent." They stood side by side at the window, watching as the storm swept across the parkland. When a particularly loud thunderclap shook the tower, Annabel jumped slightly, and Andrew's arm came around her waist in an instinctive gesture of protection. "Forgive me," he said, starting to withdraw. "No," she replied quickly, placing her hand over his to keep it in place. "I don't mind." For a moment they remained thus, the contact between them a bridge across the careful distance they had maintained for so long. Then, slowly, Andrew turned her to face him, his expression serious in the flickering candlelight. "Annabel," he said, his voice low, "these past weeks, you have shown me what a marriage might be, what our marriage might be, if we choose it." Her heart quickened at his words. "What are you saying, Andrew?" "I'm saying that I was wrong. That first night when I told you our marriage meant nothing, I was wrong. It can mean whatever we wish it to mean." "And what do you wish it to mean?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. "I wish it to be real," he replied simply. "Not a business arrangement, not a duty performed, but a true partnership. I cannot promise you the grand passion of poetry and novels, but I can offer you my respect, my trust, and my fidelity. Perhaps in time, even my heart." Tears pricked at Annabel's eyes. "I want that too," she whispered. "Very much." Andrew's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped. "Then we shall begin again, you and I, not as strangers forced together by circumstance, but as companions who choose each other freely." When his lips met hers, it was not with the detached formality of their previous encounters, but with a gentle tenderness that held the promise of deeper feeling. Annabel found herself responding with a warmth she had never dared to show before, her arms sliding around his neck as the storm raged forgotten outside. They returned to London the following week, both outwardly unchanged, yet inwardly transformed. Their marriage had not suddenly become a love match from a romantic novel, but a foundation had been laid for something genuine and potentially lasting. Andrew was still frequently absent due to his business interests, but he now made a point of breakfasting with Annabel each morning before he left and dining with her each evening when he returned. Their conversations grew more open, more honest, as the barriers between them gradually lowered. In society, too, there was a subtle shift in their public persona. The Duke was seen to seek out his wife's company at events, to solicit her opinion, to watch her with something that looked remarkably like pride as she navigated the treacherous waters of the Tun with increasing confidence. The whispers changed accordingly. The pitied young Duchess and her cold, distant husband were replaced in gossip by speculation about the apparent warming of the Hartwick marriage. Some attributed it to the Duke's accident and his wife's devoted nursing. Others suggested more cynically that the Bedford line required an heir, and the Duke had finally decided to apply himself to the task in earnest. Only Annabel and Andrew knew the truth, that something fragile but precious was growing between them, neither the cold duty of their early marriage nor the dramatic passion of romantic fiction, but something more realistic and potentially more enduring: mutual respect, growing affection, and the shared commitment to build a life together. Then came the Duchess of Richmond's annual ball, an event that would test their newfound understanding in ways neither could have anticipated. The ball was one of the most prestigious occasions of the season, attended by the cream of society, and even, on occasion, by royalty. Annabel had spent weeks preparing, selecting a gown of deep blue silk that complemented her fair colouring and having her mother's sapphires reset in a more modern style. "You look magnificent," Andrew said with genuine admiration as she descended the staircase at Hartwick House on the evening of the ball. "Thank you," she replied, pleased by the warmth in his eyes. "You are quite handsome yourself." And indeed he was, resplendent in formal evening wear, the multiple decorations on his chest testifying to the Bedford family's long service to the crown. As they entered their carriage, Annabel felt a surge of pride to be escorted by such a distinguished figure, and one who, against all expectations, was becoming dear to her. The Duchess of Richmond's ballroom was ablaze with candlelight, the air filled with music, perfume, and the buzz of conversation. As the Duke and Duchess of Hartwick were announced, Annabel was conscious of the many eyes upon them, assessing, speculating, measuring the distance, physical and emotional, between them. To her surprise, Andrew kept her hand firmly on his arm as they made their way through the crowd, presenting a united front that was new to their public appearances. Several acquaintances remarked on his recovery from his accident, to which he invariably replied with some variation of, "Thanks to my wife's excellent care, I am fully restored." The evening progressed pleasantly enough until, during a brief separation when Andrew was engaged in conversation with a government minister, Annabel overheard a conversation that chilled her blood. "I saw her myself, on the Great North Road," a woman's voice said from behind a potted palm. "In the Duke's own travelling carriage. There's no mistaking that crest." "But I thought Lady Blackwood had gone to Italy," another voice replied. "So we were meant to believe. But it seems the Duke has merely hidden her away in Yorkshire instead. At one of his hunting lodges, they say. How scandalous, and his poor young wife none the wiser." Annabel froze, her mind racing. Could it be true? Had Andrew's newfound attentiveness been merely a screen behind which he continued his relationship with Victoria Blackwood? Had his business in Yorkshire been a pretext for meeting his true preference? No, she told herself firmly. She would not believe it, not without evidence. Not after the trust that had grown between them. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted, and as she rejoined Andrew for their promised dance, she could not help but study his face for signs of deception. He seemed to sense her sudden withdrawal, his brow furrowing slightly as he guided her through the steps of the waltz. "Is something wrong?" he asked quietly. "No," she replied automatically, then, remembering their commitment to honesty, amended, "Perhaps. I overheard something troubling." "Tell me," he urged. But before she could explain, the dance ended, and they were separated once more by the press of the crowd. Annabel found herself cornered by Lady Pembroke, whose expression of sympathetic concern immediately put her on guard. "My dear Duchess," Lady Pembroke began, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper, "I feel it my duty as a friend to inform you of certain rumours that are circulating." "Rumours are always circulating, Lady Pembroke," Annabel replied coolly. "Most of them, as my husband says, utterly without foundation." "Perhaps," Lady Pembroke conceded, "but when the evidence is so compelling, my own nephew saw Lady Blackwood travelling north in a carriage bearing the Bedford crest, and now there are whispers that she has been installed in the Duke's hunting lodge in Yorkshire, rather than sent to Italy, as we were led to believe." Annabel maintained her composure with effort. "Your concern is noted, Lady Pembroke, but I trust my husband implicitly." The words were spoken with more conviction than she truly felt, but she would not give the gossip-monger the satisfaction of seeing her doubt. Lady Pembroke's disappointed expression would have been comical under other circumstances. When Andrew found her again, his face showed concern. "You look pale, Annabel. Would you like to leave?" "Yes," she admitted. "I find I have a headache coming on." In the carriage on the way home, Andrew studied her face in the dim light. "Now tell me what troubled you at the ball." Annabel hesitated, then decided that directness was the only path forward. "There are rumours that Lady Blackwood did not go to Italy as announced, but is instead staying at your hunting lodge in Yorkshire, that she was seen travelling north in a carriage bearing the Bedford crest. Andrew's expression darkened. I see. Is it true? She asked, her heart in her throat. No, he said firmly. Victoria Blackwood sailed for Italy 3 weeks ago. I received confirmation from my agent in Naples that she has taken up residence there. Then why the rumours? Why would people claim to have seen her travelling north? Andrew sighed deeply. Because Victoria was not the only person to leave London in a carriage bearing the Bedford crest. My cousin, Lady Caroline Bentley, departed for her home in Yorkshire the same week. They are similar in appearance, both being tall with dark hair. From a distance one might easily mistake one for the other. Relief washed over Annabel. Why did you not mention your cousin's journey? Because it did not occur to me that it would matter, he replied simply. Caroline visits her childhood home several times a year. There was nothing remarkable about her journey. Annabel studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, but found only open honesty in his gaze. I believe you, she said finally. Thank you, he replied, taking her hand in his. Your trust means more to me than you know, Annabel. Spring arrived in London with unusual warmth, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed to extend beyond the blossoming gardens of Hartwick House. In the months following the Duchess of Richmond's ball, a gradual but unmistakable transformation had occurred in the marriage of the Duke and Duchess of Hartwick. Andrew no longer disappeared for weeks at a time, limiting his business travels to brief, necessary journeys. When in London, he took to breakfasting with Annabel each morning, sharing the newspapers and discussing the day ahead. In the evenings, they often retired to the library together, where Annabel would read aloud or listen as Andrew explained his business ventures with surprising patience. They had not spoken of love. That word remained unvoiced between them, but there was a growing companionship, a mutual respect that made Annabel dare to hope for more. The Duke still maintained a certain reserve, yet there were moments when his guard slipped, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the aristocratic facade. One such moment occurred on a mild April evening as they walked together in the garden, a habit they had recently established. My mother loved these roses, Andrew remarked, touching a budding white bloom with unexpected gentleness. She would spend hours tending them herself, much to the gardener's dismay. You never speak of your parents, Annabel observed quietly. Andrew's expression grew distant. My father was a difficult man, cold, demanding. Nothing was ever quite good enough for him. My mother was his opposite, warm, gentle, always ready with a kind word or an embrace. You take after her in that, Annabel said softly, then blushed at her boldness. Andrew looked at her in surprise. Do I? Sometimes, when you forget to be the Duke and are simply Andrew instead. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. I was not aware there was a difference. Oh, there is, she assured him, growing more confident. The Duke is formidable, aloof, concerned with duty and propriety. But Andrew, he notices when the kitchen maid is crying because her mother is ill and arranges for the physician to visit. He remembers that Mrs. Fairchild suffers from rheumatism and orders the fires lit in her rooms, even in mild weather. Andrew looked genuinely startled. You notice such things? I notice everything about you, she admitted, her cheeks warming further. For a moment, Andrew seemed at a loss for words. Then, hesitantly, he reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. I have not been observant enough, it seems. The touch of his hand, freely given rather than offered out of duty, sent a flutter through Annabel's heart. They continued their walk in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts. As April gave way to May, London society buzzed with anticipation for the most prestigious event of the season, the Queen's Ball at Buckingham Palace. For Annabel, who had never been presented at court before her hasty marriage, it would be her first appearance before the monarch as the Duchess of Hartwick. Are you nervous? Andrew asked the evening before, finding her in the library studying a book on court etiquette. Terrified, she admitted with a small laugh. I'm convinced I shall trip over my train or address Her Majesty improperly. You will do splendidly, he assured her, his confidence genuine. You were born for this role, Annabel. His faith in her was a balm to her anxieties, and the following evening, as their carriage joined the long queue approaching the palace, Annabel felt a calm determination replace her earlier fears. "You look magnificent," Andrew murmured as he helped her from the carriage. And indeed, her gown of silver tissue over pale blue silk, adorned with Bedford diamonds at her throat and in her hair, transformed her from a pretty young woman into a vision of aristocratic elegance. Andrew himself cut an imposing figure in his formal court attire, the multiple decorations on his chest testament to his family's long service to the crown. As they processed through the grand staterooms toward the throne room, Annabel was aware of the curious glances and whispers that followed them. "The Duke and Duchess of Hartwick," announced the Lord Chamberlain as they approached the Queen. Annabel executed her curtsy perfectly, head bowed in respect before the diminutive monarch. When she rose, she was surprised to find Queen Victoria regarding her with particular interest. "We have heard much about you, Duchess," the Queen remarked. "Your charitable work with the orphanage in St. Giles has been noted with approval." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Annabel replied, momentarily stunned that her modest efforts had reached royal ears. "And you, Duke," the Queen continued, turning to Andrew. "We are pleased to see you taking a more active interest in court affairs of late. Marriage appears to agree with you." "Indeed, Your Majesty," Andrew responded with a bow. "I find myself fortunate beyond measure." As they moved away to allow the next presentation, Annabel glanced at her husband in surprise. Had he merely been offering the expected courtly flattery, or had there been genuine feeling behind his words? The answer came later that evening as they circulated among the assembled nobility. Sir Edward Pembroke, a notorious gossip, approached them with an oily smile. "Your Grace," he addressed Andrew, barely acknowledging Annabel. "I was most sorry to hear about Lady Blackwood's unfortunate situation." Andrew's expression remained neutral. "I'm afraid I don't follow, Sir Edward." "Why, her sudden departure for the continent," Pembroke replied, clearly disappointed by the Duke's lack of reaction. "Quite precipitous, I understand. Something about financial irregularities and forged signatures. Most distressing." "Indeed," Andrew replied coolly. "One can only hope she finds the fresh start she seeks." "They say she was quite desperate toward the end," Pembroke persisted, claiming all manner of intimate connections with certain members of the peerage. Andrew's posture stiffened imperceptibly. "Sir Edward, may I present my wife, the Duchess of Hartwick? I don't believe you've been formally introduced." The abrupt change of subject forced Pembroke to turn his attention to Annabel, who met his gaze with serene composure. "Charmed, Your Grace," he murmured, executing a shallow bow. "Sir Edward," Annabel acknowledged, "I understand you have an interest in horticulture. My husband has been restoring the rose gardens at our Derbyshire estate. Perhaps you might offer some insights." As she skillfully steered the conversation to safer topics, Annabel was aware of Andrew watching her with what appeared to be admiration. When Pembroke finally moved on, Andrew leaned close to her ear. "Beautifully handled," he murmured. "You've become quite the diplomat." "I've had an excellent teacher in navigating treacherous social waters," she replied with a small smile. "Have you indeed? And who might that be?" "Observation, Your Grace," she answered lightly. "I've spent the past year watching how the Duke of Hartwick manages to say nothing while appearing to say everything." Andrew laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that drew startled glances from nearby courtiers. "Touché, my dear. It seems I've underestimated you at every turn." The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur, but it was during their return to Hartwick House that the true significance of the night revealed itself. "You were the toast of the court," Andrew remarked as their carriage rolled through the darkened streets. Even the Queen was impressed. "It was a memorable evening," Annabel agreed, fatigue beginning to overtake her excitement. "There is something you should know," Andrew said after a moment of silence, "about Victoria Blackwood." Annabel tensed slightly. "Yes?" "The financial irregularities Pembroke mentioned. They were more serious than mere gossip. Victoria had indeed forged my signature on several substantial loan documents. When the creditors began to press her, she attempted to blackmail me with threats of scandal." "What did you do?" Annabel asked quietly. "I presented her with a choice: face prosecution for forgery, or accept passage to Italy and a small annual allowance, conditional upon her permanent exile from England." "That was merciful of you," Annabel observed. Andrew's expression hardened momentarily. "Not entirely. The scandal of a trial would have touched you as well, and you have suffered enough from her machinations. But I wanted you to know the truth. There will be no more midnight visits, no more malicious rumors from that quarter. Annabel studied his face in the dim light of the carriage lanterns. Thank you for telling me. But why now? Andrew hesitated, then reached for her hand. Because I wish there to be no more secrets between us, Annabel. These past months have shown me what a true partnership might be. I married you out of duty, but I have come to value you for reasons that have nothing to do with obligation. It was not a declaration of love, but in Andrew's cautious vocabulary, it was perhaps the closest approximation. Annabel's heart quickened at the sincerity in his eyes. I have come to value you as well, she replied softly. The weeks following the Queen's Ball saw a further warming in their relationship. Andrew began inviting Annabel to accompany him on his shorter business trips, showing her the vast Bedford holdings with evident pride. For her part, Annabel took a deeper interest in the family's financial affairs, revealing an aptitude for numbers that impressed even Andrew's seasoned steward. In early June, they departed London for Thornhill Park, the Duke's principal country seat in Derbyshire. The ancient manor house, with its Tudor facade and extensive grounds, had been the heart of Bedford power for centuries. As their carriage approached through the avenue of ancient oaks, Annabel caught her breath at the sight of the house, glowing golden in the afternoon sun. "It's magnificent!" she exclaimed. "It is home," Andrew replied simply, watching her reaction with pleasure. The next 2 weeks passed in peaceful contentment as Annabel explored the estate and acquainted herself with the local gentry. Andrew seemed more relaxed here than in London, less the formal duke, and more the man she had glimpsed in rare, unguarded moments. One evening, as they sat in the library after dinner, a summer storm raged outside, lightning occasionally illuminating the room through the tall windows. Annabel sat on a window seat, watching the dramatic display while Andrew worked at his desk nearby. "I used to be terrified of storms as a child," she remarked, as a particularly loud thunderclap shook the house. Andrew looked up from his papers. "And now?" "Now I find them exhilarating," she admitted. "There's something magnificent about nature's raw power, don't you think?" Andrew set aside his quill and came to join her at the window. "I've always thought so. When I was a boy, I would sneak out during storms to watch from the old oak by the lake. My father caught me once. I was confined to my room for a week as punishment." Annabel studied his profile, outlined against the window by another flash of lightning. "You rarely speak of your childhood." "It was not particularly happy," he replied, his voice distant. "My father was demanding. Nothing I did ever pleased him. I was too bookish, too sensitive, not sufficiently interested in hunting or sports. The perfect heir existed only in his imagination." "That must have been difficult," Annabel said softly. Andrew's mouth curved in a humorless smile. "It made me who I am, for better or worse." "I like who you are," she said simply. He turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "Do you? Even knowing how cold I was to you? How I neglected you for months? You were protecting yourself," she replied with unexpected insight. "Just as I was. We were both forced into this marriage, both afraid of being hurt." Andrew regarded her with wonder. "When did you become so wise?" "I've had time to think, to observe," she answered. "And I've come to understand that behind the Duke's formidable exterior is a man of honor and surprising tenderness." He reached out, tentatively brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And behind the dutiful Duchess is a woman of remarkable courage and intelligence." Their eyes held in the dim light, something unspoken passing between them. Slowly Andrew leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss unlike any they had shared before. Not a formal duty or a gesture of growing affection, but something deeper, more urgent. When they drew apart, both slightly breathless, Andrew spoke the words Annabel had begun to fear she would never hear. "I love you, Annabel," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "Not out of duty or obligation, but truly, deeply. I think perhaps I have for some time, only I was too proud, too afraid to acknowledge it." Joy bloomed in Annabel's heart, bright and overwhelming. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I began to fall in love with you that day in the garden, when you spoke so tenderly of your mother's roses." Andrew smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his usually stern features. "And I with you. though I fought against it mightily. The day you stood beside me to face Victoria, showing such courage and dignity, I knew then that I had found my match in every way that matters. As the storm raged outside, they remained by the window, talking far into the night as they never had before, sharing childhood memories, hopes, fears, dreams for the future. With each revelation, each confidence exchanged, the last barriers between them crumbled. Later, when they retired to the Duke's chambers, now shared with his Duchess by choice rather than convention, their coming together was a true union at last, not a duty performed, but a joyful expression of new-found love. The following morning, Annabel woke to find Andrew watching her, his eyes soft with an emotion she had once despaired of ever seeing. "Good morning, Your Grace," she murmured sleepily. "Good morning, my love," he replied, drawing her close. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I ever have," she admitted, nestling against him. He kissed her forehead gently. "I was thinking, perhaps it's time we invited your parents to visit. I should like to show your father that his daughter is valued as she deserves to be." Annabel raised herself on one elbow to look at him in surprise. "Truly? You would not mind?" "I would welcome it," he assured her. "And perhaps, while they are here, we might discuss the possibility of expanding our family." A blush rose to Annabel's cheeks. "You wish for children?" "I do," he said seriously. "With you, Annabel. Little girls with your courage, and boys with your kind heart." Tears of happiness sprang to her eyes. "I want that too. So very much." Their idyllic interlude at Thornhill Park was interrupted a week later by the arrival of an urgent message from London. One of Andrew's shipping ventures had encountered difficulties, requiring his immediate attention. "I must return to the city," he told Annabel over breakfast, his expression regretful. "But there is no need for you to cut short your stay here. I know how much you've come to love Thornhill." "My place is with you," she replied without hesitation. "Besides, we have the Elliston ball next week. I should hate to miss it." Andrew smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Very well. We shall return together." The journey back to London was made in companionable conversation, so different from their silent, awkward carriage rides of the past. As they approached the city, however, Andrew grew pensive. "What troubles you?" Annabel asked, noting the furrow between his brows. "This business with the shipping venture. It's more serious than I initially believed. If the cargo is lost, it could mean financial ruin for several of my associates." "But not for you?" she asked cautiously. "No, our fortune is diversified enough to weather such a storm, but I feel responsible for those who invested on my recommendation." Annabel squeezed his hand. "You will find a solution. I have faith in you." His grateful smile warmed her heart. "Your confidence means more than you know." The next several days were a whirlwind of meetings and negotiations as Andrew worked tirelessly to salvage the situation. Annabel saw little of him except late at night, when he would return exhausted to their chamber, often falling asleep as soon as his head touched the pillow. Despite his preoccupation, Andrew insisted they attend the Elliston ball as planned. "You have been looking forward to it," he said firmly, "and an evening of diversion would do us both good." The Ellistons were known for their lavish entertainments, and this ball was no exception. The ballroom of their Mayfair mansion was transformed into a scene from A Midsummer Night's Dream, with garlands of flowers, twinkling lights, and even live butterflies released at midnight. Annabel, resplendent in a gown of pale gold that complemented her auburn hair, found herself the center of much positive attention. Her transformation from the shy, uncertain bride of a year ago to the confident, poised Duchess of Hartwick had not gone unnoticed by society. "So you are blooming, my dear," observed Lady Carlton, an influential matron whose approval was highly sought. "Marriage clearly agrees with you." "Indeed it does," Annabel replied with a genuine smile, her gaze seeking out Andrew across the room. She found him deep in conversation with Lord Elliston and several other gentlemen, his expression serious. Business, no doubt, even at a ball. But as if sensing her attention, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the crowded room. The warmth in his gaze, visible even at a distance, sent a flutter through her heart. Later, as they danced together, Andrew seemed more relaxed than he had been in days. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured as they moved through the steps of the waltz. "Every man in the room envies me." "Hardly that," she demurred, though pleased by the compliment. Have your business concerns been resolved? Not entirely, but I believe we're making progress. Lord Elliston has agreed to extend his backing, which may be enough to keep the venture afloat until the missing ship is located. Missing? I thought it was lost. That's the prevailing assumption, but I've received information suggesting it may have been forced to shelter in a remote harbor due to storm damage. I've dispatched agents to investigate. Their conversation was interrupted as the dance ended, and they were separated by the flow of the crowd. Annabel found herself approached by several acquaintances, all seemingly eager for her company, now that her marriage was perceived to be a success rather than the failure it had initially been rumored to be. As she circulated through the ballroom, Annabel overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "She's back in London, you know," a woman's voice said in carrying tones. "Returned from Italy not 3 days ago. Lady Harrington saw her at the opera last night." "Lady Blackwood, how extraordinary. I thought she was exiled permanently." "Apparently not, and rumour has it she's seeking a reconciliation with the Duke, claims to have evidence that will force his hand. But he seems quite devoted to his duchess now. Surely he wouldn't—" "Men are fickle creatures, my dear, and they say she still holds his heart, despite appearances." Annabel moved away quickly, her mind racing. Victoria Blackwood back in London, with evidence of some kind? What could it be, and would it threaten the happiness she and Andrew had found together? She was so distracted by these troubling thoughts that she nearly collided with a tall figure in the doorway to the terrace. "Your Grace," said a familiar voice tinged with amusement. "How fortuitous. I was just thinking of you." Annabel looked up into the beautiful, calculating face of Victoria Blackwood. The Countess was as striking as ever, in a gown of deep crimson that emphasized her dramatic coloring. At her throat gleamed a diamond necklace that Annabel recognized with a shock as a Bedford heirloom, one she had seen in the family portrait gallery at Thornhill Park. "Lady Blackwood," she acknowledged, struggling to maintain her composure, "I was under the impression you were abroad." "Italy grew tiresome," Victoria replied with a dismissive wave. "The climate disagreed with me. Besides, I have unfinished business in London." Her gaze flickered meaningfully to where Andrew stood across the room, still deep in conversation with Lord Elliston. "I believe all your business with my husband was concluded before your departure," Annabel said firmly. Victoria's smile did not reach her eyes. "How charming, you actually believe that. Tell me, does he visit your chamber more than once a month now? Has he learned to say your name with some semblance of affection?" The barbed questions, so precisely aimed at Annabel's former insecurities, revealed how closely Victoria must have been monitoring their marriage even before her departure. But they no longer had the power to wound, as they once might have done. "My marriage is not a subject open for discussion, Lady Blackwood," Annabel replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me." "Of course," Victoria agreed with false sweetness. "Do give Andrew my regards. Tell him I look forward to our reunion." As she moved away, Annabel noticed that several nearby guests had observed their exchange with avid curiosity. Within minutes, she knew, the news of Lady Blackwood's return and her confrontation with the Duchess would be circulating throughout the ballroom. She needed to find Andrew immediately. Annabel made her way through the crowded ballroom, searching for Andrew. Her heart pounded as she considered what Victoria Blackwood's return might mean for their newfound happiness. The diamond necklace troubled her most, a Bedford heirloom that should never have been in the Countess's possession. She finally spotted Andrew near the refreshment table, still engaged in conversation with Lord Elliston. As she approached, he looked up, his expression immediately shifting to concern when he saw her face. "Annabel, what's wrong?" he asked, excusing himself from the group. "She's here," Annabel said quietly, taking his arm and leading him toward a quieter corner. "Victoria Blackwood has returned to London." Andrew's expression darkened. "I know. My solicitor informed me yesterday." "You knew?" Annabel felt a flicker of hurt that he hadn't shared this information with her. "I only learned of it yesterday afternoon while you were visiting your dressmaker," he explained quickly. "I intended to tell you tonight after the ball, when we could speak privately. I didn't want to distress you before this event." "She approached me just now," Annabel continued. "She's wearing a Bedford diamond necklace, Andrew, the one from your grandmother's portrait at Thornhill." Andrew's face paled. "That's impossible. Those diamonds are in the Bedford vault at our bank." "Are you certain? When did you last see them?" He frowned, thinking, Not for years. They haven't been worn since my mother's death, but Victoria should have no access to them. Yet she's wearing them tonight, Annabel insisted, and she implied that you and she had some unfinished business. Andrew's jaw tightened. The only business between Victoria Blackwood and myself is concluded. She accepted my terms when she departed for Italy. If she's returned to London with Bedford jewels and insinuations, then she's playing a dangerous game. He took Annabel's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Listen to me, Annabel. Whatever Victoria may claim, whatever she may imply, there is nothing between us, and never has been. You are my wife, the only woman I love or ever will love. The declaration, spoken without hesitation in the midst of a crowded ballroom, filled Annabel with warmth despite her anxiety. I believe you, she said softly. But what does she want? And how did she get those diamonds? I intend to find out, Andrew replied grimly. Wait here. Before Annabel could protest, he strode purposefully across the ballroom. She watched as he approached Victoria, who was holding court among a group of admirers near the terrace doors. The Countess's face lit up with triumph as she saw him approach, but her expression quickly faltered at whatever he said to her. After a brief, tense exchange, Andrew turned and walked away, leaving Victoria looking both furious and shaken. He returned to Annabel's side, his expression controlled but anger evident in the set of his jaw. We're leaving, he said quietly. Now. What happened? Annabel asked as he led her toward the entrance. Not here, he replied. I'll explain everything when we're home. The ride back to Hartwick House was conducted in tense silence. Andrew stared out the carriage window, his profile rigid with contained anger. Annabel waited, knowing that pressing him now would be futile. Once they were safely ensconced in the library at Hartwick House, Andrew poured himself a brandy and took a long swallow before turning to face her. Victoria claims the necklace was a gift from me during our supposed relationship, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. She says she has letters proving my affection for her, as well as documentation of jewels and property transferred to her name. But that's not true, Annabel said, a statement rather than a question. Of course not, he replied vehemently. The woman is delusional, or more likely calculating. The evidence she speaks of must be forgeries like the loan documents. But the necklace, I've already sent word to my bank. The vault will be checked first thing in the morning. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. If the Bedford diamonds are missing, then someone with access has betrayed us. Who would have such access? Very few people. Myself, my solicitor, and... His expression darkened further. My steward, Phillips, who was my father's man before he was mine, and who has always been unusually supportive of Victoria's presence in our lives. Annabel considered this. Could he have provided her with copies of the keys, or the combination to the vault? It's possible, Andrew admitted. Phillips accompanied me to the bank several times when I was reviewing estate matters. He could have observed the process. What does Victoria hope to gain from this? Annabel wondered. Surely she must know you would never leave me for her, regardless of her claims. Andrew's expression softened as he looked at his wife. No, I would never leave you. But Victoria doesn't seek love, Annabel. She seeks position, wealth, and power. If she can create enough of a scandal around our marriage, she may hope to force a settlement from me, a more generous one than she received before. Or she may hope to ruin you socially, Annabel suggested, to punish you for choosing me instead of her. Either way, Andrew said grimly, she will not succeed. I won't allow her to threaten our happiness or the Bedford name. He crossed to where Annabel stood and took her hands in his. I promise you this will be resolved. Victoria Blackwood will not come between us. The following morning brought confirmation of Andrew's fears. The Bedford diamonds were indeed missing from the bank vault, apparently removed several months earlier, by someone using the Duke's authorization seal, a seal that had been reported misplaced and subsequently replaced just before their visit to Thornhill Park. Phillips, Andrew said flatly when the bank manager delivered this news. He must have taken the seal and had a copy made before finding the original. Events moved quickly after that. Andrew's solicitor was summoned, statements were taken, and by afternoon, Phillips had been detained for questioning. Under pressure, the steward confessed to assisting Lady Blackwood in accessing the Bedford jewels and forging documents, apparently in exchange for a substantial payment, and the promise of a position managing her estates once she had secured her rightful place as Andrew's wife. She was convinced that if she could create enough scandal, enough doubt about your marriage, the Duke would be forced to abandon you, Phillips explained miserably. She said it was only a matter of time before he came to his senses and realized that you were a mistake. Andrew's fury at this betrayal was cold and terrible to behold. Phillips was remanded to the authorities, charged with theft and fraud, while warrants were issued for the recovery of the Bedford diamonds and Lady Blackwood's arrest on similar charges. Phillips, once the trusted steward of both the Duke and his late father, was swiftly brought to trial. His confession, coupled with the overwhelming evidence of his collaboration with Lady Blackwood, left little room for defense. He was sentenced to 10 years' transportation to Australia, a fate that, some whispered, was more merciful than he deserved. With his departure, the last shadow of betrayal within Hartwick House was finally lifted. But Victoria, it seemed, had anticipated this move. When the authorities arrived at her London residence, they found it empty, the Countess having departed hastily in the night. The diamonds, however, were recovered, left behind in her rush to escape, perhaps, or abandoned as too recognizable to be of use to her as a fugitive. She'll have fled to the continent, Andrew surmised when he received this news. Back to Italy, most likely, where she has already established herself. Will you pursue her? Annabel asked. Andrew shook his head. Let her go. She has lost her leverage with the recovery of the diamonds and Phillips's confession. Without the Bedford fortune to sustain her, she'll find life abroad less comfortable than she hoped. But she'll survive. Victoria always does. Annabel thought the matter concluded, but the following week brought an unexpected development. As she and Andrew prepared to attend the Duchess of Montrose's summer reception, one of the last major events of the season, a note was delivered from Lady Carlton, warning them that Victoria Blackwood had returned to London and was expected to attend the same event. She's grown desperate, Andrew said grimly after reading the note. This is her last attempt to create a public scene, to force my hand. Should we stay away? Annabel suggested. Avoid the confrontation entirely. Andrew considered this, then shook his head decisively. No, that would only give credence to her lies. We will attend as planned, present a united front, and face whatever comes with dignity. Together, Annabel said, taking his hand. Always, he replied, bringing her fingers to his lips. The Duchess of Montrose's reception was held in the magnificent gardens of Montrose House, with marquees erected on the lawns and lanterns hanging from the trees. As dusk fell, the setting took on an enchanted quality, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting in ornamental ponds and illuminating the faces of London's elite. Annabel and Andrew arrived fashionably late, their entrance causing the expected stir. She was conscious of the many eyes upon them, the speculative whispers that followed their progress through the crowd. Clearly, word of Victoria Blackwood's return and the scandal of the Bedford diamonds had spread throughout society. They had been there perhaps an hour, making polite conversation and accepting congratulations on the recovery of the family jewels, when a disturbance near the entrance to the main marquee drew everyone's attention. Victoria Blackwood stood there, dramatically framed by the tent opening, her beauty enhanced by a gown of deep emerald that emphasized her dark hair and pale skin. At her throat gleamed not the Bedford diamonds, but an emerald pendant that matched her gown. The silence that fell over the gathering was immediate and expectant. The Countess's gaze swept the crowd until it found Andrew and Annabel standing together near the center of the marquee. With deliberate steps, she approached them, her head held high despite the murmurs that followed her progress. Your Grace, she addressed Andrew, ignoring Annabel entirely. How fortunate to find you here. I believe we have matters to discuss. Andrew's expression remained impassive. I believe all matters between us have been concluded, Lady Blackwood, particularly with the recovery of certain family heirlooms that were temporarily misplaced. A flash of anger crossed Victoria's beautiful face. Is that what you're calling it? A misplacement? How convenient for you to reduce our relationship to a matter of jewelry. There was no relationship, Victoria, Andrew replied, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed tent. There never has been, save in your imagination. Victoria laughed, a brittle sound. Oh, how gallant you've become, rewriting history to protect your child bride's feelings. Tell me, Andrew, does she know about the nights we spent together at your hunting lodge, The promises you made, the future you planned, before her father's debts forced you into this convenient marriage. Annabel felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. The accusations were so specific, delivered with such conviction, that even she felt a momentary doubt. Around them, the assembled guests watched with avid fascination, like spectators at a theatre. There were no such nights, no such promises, Andrew stated flatly. As you well know. Liar, Victoria spat, her composure cracking. I have proof, letters, witnesses who saw us together. Forged letters, Andrew corrected her, and witnesses paid to lie, like my former steward Phillips, who, I might add, has confessed to his part in your scheme. Victoria's gaze darted around the marquee, taking in the expressions of the crowd, which had begun to shift from fascination to disapproval, directed not at the Duke, but at her. You've always been clever with words, Andrew, she said, changing tactics. Her voice softened, took on a pleading note. But we both know the truth. What we shared was real. Don't deny it. Not here. Not now. Not for her sake. Andrew's expression remained unmoved. What we shared, Victoria, was a family connection through your late husband, nothing more. Any other interpretation exists only in your mind. Victoria's face contorted with rage. How dare you dismiss me this way? After everything I've done for you, everything I've been to you. She can never love you as I have. This insipid girl who knows nothing of the world, nothing of passion. Before anyone could react, Victoria lunged forward and grasped Annabel's arm, her fingers digging painfully into the flesh. Tell me, little Duchess, has he told you he loves you yet? Has he whispered it in the dark when he can pretend you're someone else? Does he call you by name when he visits your bed? Or does he keep his eyes closed, imagining another? Gasps of shock rippled through the crowd at this crude display. Annabel stood frozen, her eyes wide with surprise and hurt. In that moment, something in Andrew's expression changed. The cool, controlled Duke of Hartwick vanished, replaced by a man whose fury was all the more terrible for its quiet intensity. Remove your hand from my wife, he said, his voice deceptively soft. Victoria, perhaps sensing the danger in his tone, released Annabel's arm but did not step back. Your wife, she sneered. A convenient legal fiction, nothing more. We both know where your heart truly lies. What happened next would be recounted in London drawing rooms for years to come. Andrew Bedford, the Duke of Hartwick, known throughout society for his reserve and rigid self-control, stepped forward and placed himself between his wife and Lady Blackwood. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the suddenly silent marquee. My heart, he said clearly, belongs entirely and exclusively to my wife, Annabel Bedford, Duchess of Hartwick. It has never belonged to anyone else, nor will it ever. Victoria's face paled. You don't mean that. You can't mean that. I have never meant anything more sincerely in my life, Andrew continued, his gaze never leaving Victoria's face. You speak of passion, Victoria, yet you understand nothing of true feeling. What I share with my wife goes beyond the physical, beyond the superficial attractions you mistake for love. Annabel has shown me what it means to be truly known, truly accepted, truly loved, not for my title or my fortune, but for myself. He turned slightly, including the stunned audience in his declaration. Let me be perfectly clear so that there can be no further misunderstanding or malicious gossip. I love my wife with every fibre of my being. Any claim to the contrary is a falsehood, any insinuation of impropriety between myself and Lady Blackwood a baseless lie. Victoria swayed slightly, as though his words had physically struck her. You'll regret this humiliation, Andrew, she hissed. I'll make sure of it. No, Victoria, he replied calmly. The only one facing humiliation here is you. I suggest you leave England immediately, before the authorities catch up with you. The charges of theft and forgery still stand, regardless of Phillips's arrest. For a moment it seemed the Countess might collapse under the weight of her defeat. Then, with a visible effort, she drew herself up, her beautiful face a mask of cold fury. This isn't over, she said quietly, for his ears alone. Remember that. With that, she turned and swept from the marquee, the crowd parting before her like water. As she disappeared into the gathering darkness of the garden, a collective exhalation seemed to pass through the assembly, followed immediately by an explosion of whispers. Andrew turned to Annabel, his expression softening as he took in her stunned face. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, taking her hands in his. "Yes," she managed, still processing what had just occurred. I never expected you to say those things, in public, in front of everyone." A smile touched his lips. "Neither did I. But they needed to be said, not just for Victoria's benefit, but for yours, and perhaps for my own as well." Around them, the whispers continued, but now they carried a different tone, not scandal but romance. The Duke of Hartwick's passionate defense of his wife, his public declaration of love, had transformed the narrative in an instant. "I believe," Andrew said, glancing around at the curious faces, "that we have provided quite enough entertainment for one evening. Shall we go home, my love?" "Yes," Annabel agreed, slipping her arm through his. "Let's go home." As they made their departure, heads held high, the whispers followed them. But now they spoke of the Duke's devotion, the Duchess's dignity, and the humiliation of the scheming Countess who had dared to come between them. Victoria Blackwood departed England the following day, never to return. Rumours placed her variously in Italy, France, and eventually America, where her beauty and title, if not her reputation, eventually secured her another wealthy husband. The scandal of the Bedford diamonds faded from society's memory, replaced by more current gossip. For Andrew and Annabel, however, the incident marked a turning point. The last barriers between them had fallen, the final secrets revealed. What had begun as a marriage of convenience, a union that meant nothing, had transformed into something neither could have imagined on that distant wedding day. As summer gave way to autumn and autumn to winter, their happiness only deepened. When the news came just before Christmas that the Duchess of Hartwick was expecting their first child, it seemed the perfect culmination of their journey from strangers to lovers. "Are you happy?" Andrew asked one snowy evening as they sat before the fire in the library at Thornhill Park, Annabel's needlework abandoned in favour of resting her hands on her growing belly. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied honestly. "And you?" Andrew knelt beside her chair, his hand joining hers to feel the movement of their child. "I once told you this marriage meant nothing," he said softly. "I was wrong, Annabel. It means everything. You mean everything." As the snow fell outside and the fire crackled in the grate, the Duke and Duchess of Hartwick shared a smile of perfect understanding, two souls who had found in each other not the prison they had feared, but the freedom to be truly themselves, truly loved at last. The end. Dear listener, you who have lived through so much, who have seen love come and go, who have faced both joy and sorrow with quiet dignity, you are a testament to resilience. Perhaps this story reminded you of your own journey, of relationships that took time to grow, of trust earned not with grand gestures but with consistency, kindness, and courage. Annabel's quiet strength and the Duke's late awakening are not just fiction. They echo the real power of second chances, of love blooming slowly but surely, and of dignity being reclaimed in silence. You, dear soul, still have so much to give and receive. Life does not end with youth. It softens, deepens, and offers a different kind of beauty, the kind that comes with wisdom, patience, and grace. You are not invisible. You are a keeper of stories, of strength, and of compassion that the world so desperately needs. As you prepare to rest tonight, may your breath slow, your worries fade, and your soul feel protected, because you deserve to sleep knowing you have weathered every storm and are still here, still shining. You are deeply valued. Sleep peacefully tonight. With all our gratitude, Legends of the Fall team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. If this story moved you, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support, from the bottom of our hearts, keeps us motivated to create more heartfelt stories filled with love, redemption, and powerful turning points. And remember, at the end of this video, another emotional story from our channel will appear. Click and let yourself be surprised once again. With gratitude, Legends of the Fall team.